Welcome to The World Today. I'm Waqas Majeed Khan. Today we're talking about the response that has come from the caretaker foreign minister, Mr. Abdullah Hussain Haroon. We did a program on this a few days back, which was the US assertion that any IMF bailout that the new government may seek would rather be finding themselves in quite a problem, since the Americans will be watching it very closely and will not be willing to help in that matter. And they think that that money would be used to repay Chinese loans. And that response has now come from the caretaker foreign minister, Abdullah Hussain Haroon, who said that it is wrong to link the Chinese loans or CPEG project with any request to the IMF. So we'll be talking about that in some detail, and we will also be talking about the relationship that is emerging between the trade relationship rather between China and the US. The Chinese have urged the Americans to return to reason. Whether they will do so or not, that remains to be seen. But right now, things are getting pretty head up as far as the trade relationship of China and the US is concerned. And it will also have a global impact. We'll be talking about that in detail as well. So let me introduce my guests in the studio. Joining me for the conversation today, first of all, we have Ali Sarwar NAqvi Saab with us. He's an ex-ambassador. And joining him, we have Yasir Masood, who is an academic. Thank you so much for being here. Sir, I'll start with you. First of all, do you think that the caretaker foreign minister's response was an adequate one, or do you think that it was something else that needed to be said when Mr. Mike Pompeo suggested that they'll be watching the IMF program very closely and they would not allow the IMF to give money or bail out Pakistan in the coming weeks?
Well, you see, at this juncture, not anything more can be said, because there is no IMF package so far. And the negotiation and the
caretaker government has not approached the IMF.
Has not approached the IMF. The Pakistan has not yet approached the IMF, and this is all hypothetical.
Absolutely.
I am surprised at Mr. Pompeo's statement, because Mr. Pompeo is presuming that we will make an appeal to the IMF and make an application for financial assistance. Number one. Number two, the point is that the IMF bailout package is to provide you a kind of support for your balance of payments deficit.
Sure.
And that is a broader portfolio than just one area of projects or cooperation with any particular country. So I don't think that the US Secretary of State, given his high status and position, should be doing this kind of thing, indulging in speculation that A, that Pakistan will apply, B, that Pakistan will be applying it or using it to pay off Chinese loans. I think, as far as I know, I'm not fully abreast with all the details of the project, of the CPEC project, but the broad understanding that I have is that much of it is in grants, especially in the first phase, and the loan component does not kick in. The repayments don't start for some time period.
To come. Yes, sir. We have Yasir with us, sir. He can shed some light on the intricacies of the project, since he's intimately involved with it. But before I come to that, Yasir, one of the things that has also come across from the foreign minister's statement is that Mr. Pompeo's statement seemed extremely inappropriate, and those comments that he made about the IMF bailout is just not in good taste, and extremely inappropriate is the right way to put it across. What is your view on that?
Well, absolutely, because you see, as my colleague, senior colleague just mentioned, that we are surprised that out of just speculations, you know, just this kind of a statement arose from Pompeo, because the reason is that up till now, nothing is on ground, nothing is on paper. We haven't approached, we haven't signed anything. And I think so the other thing is, like, there are many other options available. IMF bailout could be one of those options. But do we go for it or we don't go for it? It's still a question. So I think it's very inappropriate, and plus linking it with CPEC. So it means that the undertone is suggesting something else, and that is that why IMF bailout would work for the Chinese loans to be paid off because of this. So it's clearly suggests that the statement is actually against the CPEC projects, against the Pakistan economic rise which is in place.
Do you think it sort of it gives a hint towards malified intentions on the US's
actually,
part?
it is giving a hint to China as well, I mean this statement, and this is a hint to the IMF as well, whatever came from Pompeo. So basically they're hinting to IMF that not to go to give loan to Pakistan just in case if Pakistan approaches for it. So it means that the real problem is that Pakistan has signed about more than $62 billion of CPEC projects, which is on the rise, and it is expected that in the coming years that will cross about more than $100 billion. So actually we have to analyze through this mechanism that what Pakistan, how are the projects going up. So it is clear that even if if Pakistan goes for it, they always give loan to Pakistan for on their terms and condition. So it seems that their terms and condition can affect Pakistan's China-Pakistan economic corridor projects. So in that case, I think so that it is pre-assumption. It is too early to say something about it until and unless Pakistan goes for it.
Of course, but it has made a lot of noise in the media. I would like to also categorically talk about Mr. Hussein's statements. He said that, and sir, this is on a diplomatic sort of vein, so I'd like your opinion on that. It is totally wrong to link an IMF package with CPEC, and there was absolutely no reason for anyone to intervene in Pakistan's relationship with China. He further went on to say that the CPEC in totality is linked with the progress and prosperity of Pakistan. It will be ensured that all the projects are completed within that time frame. And lastly, sir, the foreign minister said that Chinese President Xi Jinping considered Pakistan as an iron brother, and absolutely there was no need for any third party to intervene in this friendship. This is the really crucial part. So why would a third country try to make comments about the relationship between two other countries? That is also, is it acceptable diplomatic behavior, sir?
No, I think this is crossing the, recognized norms of diplomacy and diplomatic interaction, because what we do in terms of bilateral cooperation with any particular country is our sovereign right, and we will do it as we deem it fit and as that country deems it fit, and that's it. But the Americans have been behaving rather strangely in this regard, in regard to CPEC. And the earlier, I will refer to you an earlier instance when General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, he made that strange statement because it did not fit into a responsible policy statement, that the CPEC project will be running through disputed territory. Now, the disputed territory that is being talked about already has had global projects. The Indus Basin Treaty covers some disputed territory, Mangla and Tarbela. So the US is a party to that treaty.
Absolutely.
Secondly, if it is disputed, then let's solve the dispute.
Absolutely, sir.
I mean, that's what we have been saying. So why go into this argument? Why talk
and that
about
also, when
such
it is totally based on hearsay and conjecture, there is nothing concrete on the ground for him to be making such statements at all, when Pakistan has not yet approached the IMF. So it begs the question that why would he need to make such statements?
Yes, so, and the IMF conditionalities, by the way, Waqas, are dealing with basically the internal economy of the country.
Right, sir.
They will ask us perhaps to meet certain conditions, and those conditions will need to be looked at, and we will have to see if we can deliver. However, there is no way that the IMF can impose upon any particular country.
And then again, sir, IMF is not the only option that would be available to Pakistan to seek financing.
That's right.
That's another one. So it's like jumping the gun in every particular way.
Right. But in any case, let not this, and there's my view, let not this stop us from going to the IMF. That's our right again.
Absolutely, sir.
It's not the US which dictates whether we go to the IMF or not.
Well, Yasir, Harun Sahib has also said that why is the US not speaking about helping the new government in Pakistan? Because earlier we've seen that there's been such a long and close relationship enjoyed by both countries, Pakistan and the US, and now we suddenly find ourselves as pariahs in that camp. So is there any way to rectify that situation?
Yes, well, if we see, since Donald Trump is in power, we have seen there is a series of events and incidents and the stances which are emanating from the US side, which clearly indicates that the relations are all time at the low level. So we know that we are not expecting any help from the US at this critical juncture. But at the other side, if we see, look at the comparison between China and US. And that's what there is a huge difference. And that is one of the reasons. That is going
to be our second topic. So let's just stick to this particular aspect, because one of the things that he expressed his concerns over was the implication of regional strategic stability arising from the continued US assistance to India in nuclear and dual-use technologies, as is evident by the recent grant of individual licenses for high technology weapons amounting to $9.7 billion given to the Indians by the US. There's no mention of that. Apart from that, there's the discriminatory approach that is being meted out to Pakistan, because our achievements in the war against terror are also being unacknowledged. That can be seen by the Americans withholding the coalition support fund reimbursements, which there's money that they owe us. So, sir, would you like to comment on this particular sort of situation that we are facing vis-a-vis the American relationship with Pakistan at the moment?
Well, all diplomatic norms and all normal diplomatic conduct have been put on the side by the new Trump administration. And that is not very good either for the United States or for the rest of the world. I mean, the world order that they had created, the US was the primary
mover and shaker
of this.
Absolutely, sir.
That world order requires certain way of dealing with things. But the Americans, they don't do it anymore, and that is very unfortunate. Now, that means what? It means we have to fend for ourselves, and we will fend for ourselves. IMF has to function. It has to remain in business. It must loan. It must give loans. That gives it financial viability.
Sir, correct me if I'm wrong, and Yasir, you can also please lean in with your opinion on this, that when we were heavily sanctioned by the US prior to 9/11, wasn't that a blessing in disguise for Pakistan, because we had to fend for ourselves, as you just said, sir, and we did manage to fend for ourselves quite well, despite all the hurdles and the sanctions that the US, our great friend, had imposed on us. What would you like to say about that?
Actually, we have to see it in the context of that with US, we had different modes of relationship. We had functional relations with them. We had trade-based relations with them. We had need-based relations with them. And every now and then, when we have seen over the years that this mode has, there was a shift in this mode every now and then. So yes, you're right that this was, in a way, blessing in disguise, that we had to look for other options. And one of the best options is that we have much more smooth and functioning relationship as a strategic partner with China. So that's where I think so it's very important that, this also gave birth to the multilateral approach from Pakistani side. See, if we compare it, our relationships, diplomatic relationships with other countries or neighbors, see, we have much more smooth sailing now in terms of, like, we have better relations with Russia, we are cozying up towards whole Central Asia. China is obviously, the best strategic partner. We are also, lending hope and creating positive overtures towards Iran. So it means that in a way this was blessing in disguise for Pakistan. And yes, this is the only way that Pakistan needs to move on. For example, like why we should be only looking towards IMF. We have much more other options available. For example, like if the new government is in place, one thing which we are expecting that the role of Pakistani diaspora, it could be very important because they have a better understanding and they have much more confidence probably in the new government. So it is just possible that the new government might look for this as an option. Then for example, like Amnesty International, which has already poured in about $1 billion to Pakistan, and this is expected that $5 million may be poured in. And then there are other options. For example, Asian Infrastructure Development Bank. There are about 86 members of that. Pakistan is also a member since 2015. So these are multilateral approaches. These are multilateral organizations. We need to further bank upon them rather than being dictated by the US. Because IMF, as we believe, is a different entity. But on the other side, it seems that US is dictating and ruling the IMF. So we need to get rid from IMF and such organizations which are imposing and dictating towards Pakistan economy. The other thing is, which I would like to mention, that through China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or through the whole concept of Belt and Road Initiative, I think we are blessed enough that we are under the fold. And it seems like just yesterday I came back from Beijing, and there is a growing realization from the Chinese side as well that they are looking towards CPEC as the lifeline of Belt and Road Initiative, in which we believe that Gawada would be playing as an anchor role. So Chinese viewpoint is that we do not want Pakistan to be relied on this short-term loans. They are intending.
It has to be a sustainable
economic country, so that we have to build that capacity building. Then the industrialization is in place for Pakistan through special economic zones, through priority special economic zones, and then this investment can also turn around your small and medium enterprises. There could be a revolution in the agriculture sector. So with all respect, with all manifestation, it's not about China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, it's not about infrastructure or roads. It will actually repair and rectify all our issues regarding economy. I can understand that it is a medium and long-term projects, but this is the only way out for Pakistan.
All right, and one of the other things that were expressed by Mr. Haroon was he was wondering whether the efforts which continue to throttle Pakistan, and he questioned the US decision to grant India the STA1 trading status, which is the one that they give to their European allies. Yeah. That is a very interesting development as well, sir. So what does that indicate to you?
Well, a very preferential treatment, and that is what the Americans are doing with this region.
So they're pushing us away from them.
They're disturbing the stability of this region in a very significant manner. India is not liked by any country in this area, in this whole South Asian sector of the continent. The Bangladeshis, the Sri Lankans, the Nepalis, they all have grouses against India because India tends to be domineering. It tends to be
belligerent,
bullying. It bullies all its smaller neighbors. So what is the American approach? To further bolster India, and with a government like Narendra Modi's, an extremist militant organization backed Prime Minister, this is a perfect recipe for instability, for creating instability. And I have one point that I want to make about the IMF. Why shouldn't we go to the IMF? We contribute to the IMF, albeit in a small way. We don't pay 21% of the budget of the IMF as the Americans do, but we are a stakeholder in the IMF, and it is our right to go to the IMF. So who are they to tell us, you can't use the money for this or that?
That's a good question, sir. We'll leave it at that. But one thing that I would like to also say, earlier this month, China also came to its defense, and they said that CPEC was against those suggestions that CPEC was exacerbating Pakistan's financial predicament, calling the idea highly irresponsible and insisting that the loans that account for CPEC are just 10% of Islamabad's debt, which sits at roughly 70% of GDP. And that also, they said that the so-called debt trap, the initiator is not China in this case. And that is also a very significant message coming from the Chinese, sir. Let's move on to our second topic, which is, of course, connected to this, and that is the kind of trade war that we are witnessing between the US and China. And, of course, the trickle-down effect is being felt by Pakistan as well in terms of the statements that Mr. Pompeo is making. I think it has more to do with China's relationship with the US than anything that Pakistan is really doing in this case. First of all, sir, 25% tariffs are now being put on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports in the US. How do you think that is going to be taken by the Chinese? Do you think they'll just sit back? Will they not have to retaliate, sir, to shore up their own economy?
Yes, I mean, my understanding is that the Chinese prices and the Chinese cost of production is still so much below the price level that prevails in the Western countries with their high cost of labor, of extremely expensive labor, that they will still be able to reach the US market. The US cannot cut out China. And the Chinese hold their treasury bonds. I mean, where do you go? The Chinese have actually given massive loans to the Americans through purchase of the treasury bonds. So the game is one which is short-sighted. It is that of a small-time bully or a tycoon who operates in a small business environment rather than the international arena.
Absolutely, sir. Well, China has refused to meet the US demands and has imposed retaliatory tariffs on US goods. How is that going to play out for American producers, especially the agricultural sector in America is already feeling the pinch? What about other sectors where Chinese inputs are used? How is that going to play out, Yasir?
See, China and US are the world's biggest trade partners with each other. And we have to also take this into consideration that it's not about a trade war with China. Actually, since Trump's administration reigned its power, we have seen that there are unruffled relations regarding trade with the European countries as well.
Especially their contribution to NATO.
Exactly, and what we have seen in the G7 summit as well. So, I mean, these policies would create problems for the US itself, because China, as we see, as a rising star, China has much more options with other countries as well. And this has created, such policies has created a sort of rift between the whole Europe and US now, because Europe have, so much trade is going on with China at the same time. So this trade war will definitely have drastic and negative implications
for the entire global economy.
For the entire global economy. And it seems beyond any perception that by all means, because what Donald Trump has pledged and promised with its own people, he is actually striving and going for that promises, but in a very bizarre and irrational way, especially if we see the series of bilateral trade relationships with US, with China, this current trade war which is happening. I mean, it will definitely have its negative implications to the entire world. And what Pakistan, if we see Pakistan, that how much Pakistan will have its implications. I think so. Pakistan is on the right move. Pakistan is on the right direction. Pakistan has to further, cooperate with China in that context. And definitely, with the passage of time, whatever issues we have regarding our economy, with this strategic partnership, we will be able to repair the multifaceted ills regarding the economy.
Well, that's very important. One of the things that the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zheng Shuang has said is that the efforts by the United States to blackmail China are going to fail. And he said that we would advise the United States to correct its attitude and not try to engage in blackmail. This will not work on China. And secondly, we would advise the US side to return to reason and not blindly let emotions affect their decisions, because in the end, this will harm themselves. How do you look at this particular message, sir? It's a pretty clear, crystal clear message emanating from the Chinese side. Do you think the Americans will be able to read the writing on the wall and react accordingly, or is this just going to be an ego war, sir?
Well, they should take it seriously. China is a rising power and has enough economic weight to affect the economies of other countries, even the United States. And if the Americans
and you mentioned earlier, sir, that the Americans owe the Chinese over $1 trillion.
Yes.
To something around that.
Of that,
so
of that magnitude.
If the Chinese were to call in their loans and say, thank you very much, can you please return our money?
Yes.
Where would that leave the US economy, sir?
Yes.
So if you could just comment on that.
I mean, this is actually a very sound advice given by the Chinese spokesman, that they should be more rational about these things rather than emotional. You know, the American president, when he came to office, he was harping on the tune that the Americans have been taken advantage of by the rest of the world.
Yes.
And he has been sort of saying that he will correct that. Now, that is basically a wrong assertion,
yes.
because they are not taken advantage of. If at all, it's the Americans
they're the ones who are taking advantage of the entire world,
of
sir.
the rest of the world.
Yes.
So, I mean, this is putting the, you know, the whole
they're turning the argument on its head.
The whole equation topsy-turvy and the argument on its own head.
Yes, sir.
Because, you know, the Americans depend upon the world. The Americans depend upon the world for their economic prosperity. And economic prosperity will not come by picking up fights with the others. It will come if they cooperate. And that is why their previous administrations have created the NAFTA, which is, you know, North American Free Trade Association.
Which also Mr. Donald Trump...
which Mr. Donald Trump has spurned and has kicked out.
Yeah, not only that, sir, the Climate Accord, to name a few.
Yes.
There was that also, and then there was the work that was done at home in terms of healthcare for
Yes.
American citizens. Everything is now is being rolled back, as they say, under Trump's administration.
And you know, there was this major pact, the Trans-Pacific TPP.
Absolutely, sir.
Which the Americans were going to sign. Trump has gone back on it.
Absolutely,
so,
sir.
You know...
Well, after going back, they did want to get back into it, but they were then rebuffed by the others, said, thank you very much, but we don't need you now.
Yes. So...
But why don't they learn their lesson, sir?
Well, I think they will eventually. They will go through this process of trying to take on the world and find that they can't do it. And once they realize that, then they will have to
change tack,
change and accommodate and compromise and become much more reasonable.
Well, can I add something,
please,
Waqas, with whatever my senior colleague just mentioned? I think, as you just said, that why they don't learn the lesson, I think they are learning this lesson right now. And all this trade war is actually reflecting that U.S. at the moment, there is a sitting anxiety, you know, and they are feeling panicky. Because you see, if we compare with China and U.S., these two different nations have different modes of development. China has, you know, banked upon, China has focused on the softer power, and US has always been focusing on the harder powers. So actually this is reflecting that they're perplexed, as you just mentioned, that they owe more than $1 trillion. So China is in a much better position to dictate, but China doesn't do that because that's not their policy framework. They haven't done that. So actually they have, what US has been up till now, that they have been working on the harder powers in different regions. And in the meantime, it has created a gulf to China, that they have even worked on the softer powers with their regional countries all over the globe. And that's where, if you see there, hardly you would see any opposition from any part of the world against China. So it means that they are learning this lesson, but it's too late for US now, because if they have been following the harder powers, the zero-sum mentality, whether China has been doing the opposite, like win-win cooperation, peaceful coexistence, and that's where there is a clear bifurcation between the modes of development between both countries. Now, if US keeps on doing this, I mean, it will further hurt them.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it, and I think you really hit the nail on the head. Well, there have been no formal talks between Washington and Beijing for many weeks since Donald Trump's demands that China make fundamental changes to its policies on, number one, intellectual property protection, technology transfers, and subsidies for high technology industries. That's one of the main things. But the Chinese response has been that the current unilateral threats and pressure from the United States will only backfire. So keeping that context in mind, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that the Americans will back off, or it is just going to get more and more accelerated and it will be to the detriment of the entire world?
I think it's just like writing on the wall, what China is coming up with, like the responses. Their responses are very rational. And, as I just mentioned in my previous comment, that Chinese way of dealing with trade and with the economy all over the world is entirely different. They do not feel acrimonious towards their partners. And as I just mentioned, that they are the biggest trade partners. And China at the moment is in a much better position to dictate their terms. So whatever US is up till now, it also reflects that out of this confusion and chaos, they are actually using some sort of tactics against China to pressurize them. And also, as Donald Trump, he's using the wrong strategies. I mean, he's is not going on the right direction. So, I mean, US should realize, and they should wake up to this reality, like this could be, backfire as the stance emanated from the Chinese side. I personally believe that instead of following this route, US should also take an example from China. And US has much more influence in the whole world now. So if they relinquish these kind of strategies, what they were adopting towards its partners, like for example, we believe that why US doesn't come and help us? You see, the other side, China is helping us in many ways. So if US follow this route, if they relinquish these kind of zero-sum mentality and come out of that phase and sincerely they help their partners in the regions, in the whole world, I think so slowly and gradually US can also attain this position which China is right now is relishing and enjoying at the moment.
Yes, but you're asking for a massive paradigm shift that may take place in US policy circles or not, which is a long shot in my opinion. But sir, what are the implications for Pakistan? Pakistan being stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, as they say. We're walking a really tight rope, balancing our relationship with the Chinese, which is very, very close and important to us, and then also not trying to antagonize the Americans too much, being that they are a superpower and then they have their influence in Afghanistan, and Pakistan also is a stakeholder. So all these things are very, it's like walking on a tightrope, sir. What's your opinion on how things are going to affect Pakistan if this trade war between the US and China further escalates?
Well, there will be some global implications in the first place, because if trade war escalates, then many commodities like soybean, which comes from China, and the US is the biggest purchaser of Chinese soybeans. And there are many other such commodities which one can look at the trade figures, which will raise the price of. That
would happen domestically in the US, sir. The domestic American consumers are going to be hit the hardest with these tariffs.
Yes. Now, Pakistan, since Pakistan is an importer of many products like palm oil or also soybeans and some other sort of food or quasi-food items, their prices will be affected, and that would be to our detriment. Then the oil prices are also shooting up. So for Pakistan, a disturbed trade environment in the global scenario is not really conducive to our economic well-being. And there, I think, the way we have to deal with it is that we should depend more upon our inner resources, which means our own agriculture products, our own industrial products,
our local resources,
and our local resources,
absolutely,
which can stand us in good stead in such a situation.
That unfortunately has never happened, sir, because we've missed the boat. We missed the boat where that happened.
And we hope that we have, you know, the level of people who will be coming in, Waqas, whether one approves of them or not, they are all, the names I have seen are well educated and very sort of sound individuals, which was not the case with the kind of politicos who were ruling the roost in the past.
Let's hope for the best, sir. One of the things that the new government has also talked a lot about is the curbing corruption. And there is a huge sum of money sitting outside Pakistan which belongs to Pakistan.
Yes.
And they've said that they're going to bring that money back.
Yes.
Let's hope that they're able to do that, because then Pakistan would really not need the IMF or any other financial support.
Right. That's right.
Whatsoever.
Right.
Any last comments that you'd like to make, Yasir?
I think so.
What should be Pakistan's strategy in dealing with this trade war between the US and Russia?
I think so.
China.
I think at the moment, you know, we should focus on our internal reforms, which are very important. For example, like if I take the example of FBR, you know, there are lots of withholding taxes, and there are lot of tax return issues. So the best strategy would be that there has to be more ease and flow of doing business for local entrepreneurs, because this will encourage, you know, exporters. And what we need to do is to, you know, lower the imports and increase our exports. So that's, you know, this is something which is in our hand. Then the local, the small and medium industry, which can play a very pivotal role in strengthening our overall economy. For example, like at the moment we have two golden triangles. One is Gujranwala, Gujarat and Sialkot, and the second one is going to be in place very soon, Gadoon, Rashakai and Hattar. So I mean, this is, you know, internally we need to facilitate, you know, the exporters, and then we need to work on our industrialization. These could set the tone for our, you know, strengthening of our economy. This is medium and long term.
And what about agriculture? Because that is
absolutely,
the backbone.
you know, agriculture is obviously, you know, we are called as an agrarian economy. So, and then another important point is the demographic dividend. You know, out of the total population, 2/3 of the majority is the youngest working population in Pakistan. So employment, you know, is one of the issue where we need to work a lot. And that's why I think so special economic zones with its forward and backward linkages can play a very important role. So these are the connecting dots on which we need to further work on.
And especially moving the agricultural output on scientific basis. That is
absolutely
very important.
Technology.
We need to do that,
yes,
on war footing.
Yes, technology as well as trade facilitation. These are very important and integral, you know, issues on which we can work, and then definitely with the passage of time things could get better.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your views with PTV World. It was a pleasure to have you. Well, you heard the conversation, and in conclusion, we always like to say, please draw your own conclusions from what you've heard. We hope and we pray that the trade war that is going on between the US and China is over, and as the Chinese have said, that the Americans can see reason rather than emotion. And with that hope, it's goodbye.